Chapter 34. "What do you want us to do?" Jack asked, getting to his feet. I shook my head. "Just find that boat." "This is nothing," I said, pointing my thumb to the only exit. There were several thumps against the door, and at least once they tried shooting through. It sounded like a shotgun. "Let's do this." I walked to the door and grabbed the handle. The power built inside me, and I couldn't help but smile. The door bolts clunked loudly back in place, and I opened it. Before I could even see the figure beyond the dark entryway, a flash and rumble of a shotgun sounded. The bullets hung midair between us, and I smiled at the rough outline of a man holding the gun. "Won't you come in?" I asked as warmly as I could fake. "You must be Jehovah's Witness. The Mormons prefer smaller caliber stuff." The man stepped forward into the lighted entryway and looked at all the frightened faces inside. In fact, I seemed to be the only one enjoying myself. "Cup of tea? A biscuit, perhaps?" What the fuck is this?" is all the goon could utter. He took one final step inside, and I slammed the door closed with the power. 1 second later, the deadbolt slammed back into place as the next hunter tried to open the door again. The panic on his face warmed my heart. He was swinging the gun wildly back and forth, pointing at each of us. "You really ought to be more careful with that thing. Did you know it accidentally went off when I opened the door?" I floated the steel balls back in front of him. Then, turning to the rest of the scared faces, I said, "Relax. I just wanted to show you a new trick I learned." I brought the steel balls in front of me and pulled the molecules apart. The balls seemed to fall to dust. With a push of my hand, the steel dust moved into the barrel of the shotgun and reformed in the opening, making it appear solid. "Not bad, right?" I looked around the bewildered faces, waiting for some kind of response. "Come on, guys, that was cool." Nella finally spoke. "Yes, Finn, very cool. Do you have a plan for this hunter standing before us?" I laughed. "Of course I do." Looking back at the hunter, I added with all seriousness, "He was just about to restart himself." A wild panic overtook the hunter, who turned and grabbed the door handle. No matter how hard he pulled, it was not going to move. I slowly took a step toward him. The only thing he could do was raise a shotgun and fire. The barrel exploded back at him as steel balls and shards of the fractured barrel backfired into his face and chest. He coughed blood and collapsed on the ground. "I think I'll go have a chat with his friends outside." No one disputed. With one hand on the door, the bolts slid again back into place. By now, the hunters on the other side were ready for it to open. Sure enough, as soon as the door opened, several shots rang out, as well as a throwing axe. I laughed out loud. "Who the hell just threw an axe at me? Is Squanto out there?" I chuckled at my joke and looked around at the serious faces. Tough crowd. The bullets hung in the air, but I let the axe flip all the way into my open hand. I winked at Zoo when I caught it by the handle instead of the blade. The bullets all dissolved into dust and reformed into one large shiny ball about the size of a large golf ball. With a flick of my wrist, the ball launched at top speed through the door into the darkness. A resounding thud came from the dark, followed by the crash against the far wall. Footsteps could be heard running away. "Wait! You forgot your axe!" I shouted. Without me throwing it, the axe flipped out of my hand into the darkness. I listened intently and couldn't make out whether I hit anyone. "Shall we see if anyone caught the axe?" I said to Nella. "Wait," she said, grabbing my arm. "How did you do those things? The power cannot be used to hurt anyone." "True, but I didn't intentionally hurt anyone. I just launched the steel ball back into the dark. I didn't aim it at anyone. Just an accident, after all," I said with a bit of a grin. She looked at me like she saw the glint of crazy in my eyes. After what I've been through today, it was inevitable. "This poor bastard," I said, pointing to the now motionless, bloody heap in front of us, "killed himself. I did nothing to force him to pull the trigger. And Nella, you haven't seen anything yet." I walked through into the darkness and pulled the door closed behind me. Turning the knob, the deadbolt slammed back into place. Several figures scampered out through the garage door into the alley. Slowly, I walked out, my head high, a look of calm on my face, and not an ounce of fear in my heart. I've already been through the valley of death. The street light in the alley showed a body lying with an axe stuck deep in the back of a hunter's skull. I looked at the circle of hunters standing, several bodies deep, all with guns drawn, a few with knives or machetes. To my right I saw Tony still lying on the ground with a thin but wiry hunter kneeling on his throat. Tony was not struggling, just desperate to breathe. Looking up, I gave a salute to the camera mounted in the alley. "I think you should get off of him," I said. "Can't you see you are making it difficult to breathe?" Silly hunter. I pulled the knife out of his hand easily and spun it rapidly 6 inches from his nose. "Please get off of him. I will not ask again." The spinning knife moved closer to his face till it was just millimeters away. Naturally, he backed off. I kept the knife spinning and stepped forward to help Tony to his feet. A gun went off just behind me. Without looking, I curved the bullet around the two of us and then released it. The hunter across from us caught it in the chest and fell back. "Please, by all means, keep shooting." I helped Tony to sit on the curb against the wall. "Stay in the spot. I need to know where you are so that I don't accidentally kill you. Got it?" He nodded, blood coming from his swollen mouth. He was clutching his side, presumably from taking a few kicks while down. I turned to the crowd and said very calmly, "You should all go home. This is your final warning. Most of you will be restarted tonight. A few will probably suffer badly till morning before restarting. Walk away. Last chance." A knife flipped through the air, followed by dozens of gunshots. Time slowed almost to a standstill as I turned the bullets one by one into dust and reformed them into the barrels of each gun pointed at me. The knife I grabbed by hand and flipped it over and over in my palm and waited. One by one, the guns backfired and killed or maimed each hunter. A few observers turned and ran. Confusion surged among the crowd as people fell to the ground, bloody and dying. I scanned the crowd for Tiffany and spotted her at the edge, still held by a hunter that seemed familiar. I took a few steps toward him and saw Horatio, the over-caffeinated Chihuahua, the assistant to Chacho, the poor fellow that happened to get in the way of his own bullet. You would think they would learn not to point guns at my girl. My girl, huh? This was also the punk who was responsible for the fire that killed Mrs. Giovanni. "Point that gun elsewhere, Horatio. You and I have a bit of unfinished business." I melted the ties that held Tiffany's hands, and she instantly pushed away from him. As he raised his gun, I dissolved the trigger and watched him frantically squeeze, trying to kill another person that I cared for. When the gun wouldn't fire, he raised it to pistol whip her. I pulled the gun out of his hand and pushed it away down the alley. His confusion lasted only a second till his rage could take over, his closed fist coming down on Tiffany's protective hands. After he landed his first blow, he went into a frenzy, swinging wildly. I threw a shield around her and moved quickly toward her to strengthen it. Each punch came down hard on the shield, but never touched her. I thought about warning him again, but I didn't want him to run away now. I wanted him to suffer first. Within an arm's reach of Tiffany and my shield, I refocused my energy to make the shield into a point, like a long, invisible ice pick. Horatio's punch came down on the unseen spike and drove deep between his knuckles and into his hand. His fist froze, hanging on an invisible spike, blood trickling down his knuckles. Horatio screamed in rage and frustration, well, probably pain too. Several more hunters took this as a good opportunity to leave. "Hey, Finn, a little help here?" Tony yelled from behind me. I spun to see 2 hunters with machetes standing over Tony. The first swung down with the oversized blade. Again, I slowed time to assess the situation. The blade of the machete came off and stuck point up between the cracks in the street. He brought down his empty hand with an unsteady swing that made him lose balance. Plus, the sole of his shoe was now melted to the cement. The blade pierced between his ribs as he fell heavily to the ground. The other hunter looked confused at what had just transpired and backed away. I pulled the machete from his hand and held it above his head. "You have about 1 second, I said, and turned around. I heard a clang of steel against the pavement and heavy footsteps running away. I looked back at Tiffany, and Horatio was gone. The blood-pointed shield still held mid-air in front of Tiffany's face. Looking out at the remaining hunters, I said, "You should all run away. I'm just getting warmed up here. Your fearless leader has already run away like the coward that he is. Go back to killing helpless old ladies in their sleep." No one moved. Part of me was glad. A loud gunshot rang out, and I distinctively slowed time and searched for the distortion trails. To my surprise, they were not pointed at me. I watched in slow motion as the chest of a hunter exploded and he flew back across the alley. Another shot rang out, and I saw the flash from the gun. Another hunter went flying. The man shooting was dressed in an expensive suit with a fedora hat and a patch over one eye. Not knowing who he was, I was reluctant to stop him. Something about the enemy of my enemy is my friend. As long as he felt obliged to shoot hunters, I didn't feel the urge to interfere. Both Tony and Tiffany moved behind me as we watched the chaos unfold. The hunters were afraid to use their guns after seeing their friend's misfortune with backfiring. One by one, the stranger cut them to pieces. Eventually, they all ran or bled out. The alley was quiet again. A haze hung under the streetlight from the shotgun, bodies and blood everywhere. The stranger walked slowly toward us. The gun hung relaxed at his side. "I got the call you might need help," he said finally, with a slight Russian accent, I think. "My name is Nico." "Finn," I said, holding out my hand. "Thanks for your help. Glad you're on our side." He shook his head. "I never get that many helpless hunters together at once. Whoever you are and whatever you did to them before I got here makes me think that I should be the one thanking you. What did you do to them?"
"Yeah," Tiffany finally spoke. "Where did you learn to do that?"
"I guarantee Zoo didn't teach you that shit. Damn, dude," Tony said. I felt a little self-conscious and paused, not knowing how to respond. "No time to explain now. Let's get inside." We were greeted by silence. Everyone had been crowded around the monitor and turned to look at us when we walked through the door. Tony started to say something about the chaos and how he got jumped, never had a chance. My attention was drawn to Tiffany's face. Someone had worked her over pretty well, probably broken her nose. "Come here and sit. I need to take a look at you," I said, leading her to the couch.
"I'll be all right. Just let me go and get cleaned up," she replied and pulled from my grasp.
She was walking with a bit of a limp. This had all the markings of the scumbag Horatio. I was actually looking forward to our next encounter. I looked back at Nico, standing motionless in the door. Nella held her hand up to silence Tony and took a step toward him. An awkward silence filled the room. It was Juliet who made the first move and pushed several people aside to get to Nico. She wrapped him in the warmest hug, causing the tension to flow out of the room.
"I knew you would come," she said to him.
"I always come when Mother calls," Nico replied softly. I had forgotten that Juliet and Mac became his foster parents when he was growing up. "How exactly did you know to show up at that exact time?" I couldn't help but ask. "I called him," Mac confessed. "I knew a storm was brewing and that things were about to go bad. So I talked to him several days ago and filled him in on the latest activities and asked him to come to town as backup. When Mike told us we were about to be overrun with hunters, I decided to call him in. Good thing, too." I took a little offense to that, but let it go. The Fallen were definitely losing the battle with me, but Nico got them into full retreat. "I'm glad you showed up when you did," I said. "Any chance you might want to help out with round 2? I'll be planning a rescue mission ASAP. How much do you know about Daniel?" Nico shrugged. He had been away and out of communication for 10 years, before Daniel was on the scene. Juliet filled him in on the details, including the events leading up to his disappearance. Juliet looked over to me and asked,
"How exactly did you come to find out that he was on the yacht? You never told us what all transpired."
"Well, I thought to myself, I was floating in a dinghy with my hands and feet bound before being dragged to the bottom of the ocean where I actually did drown." "Yeah." Instead, I said, "I was pursuing them, as I told Nella. Anon wanted to make a deal. I didn't cooperate. One thing led to another, and they got away. And here we are." Well, not exactly a lie. Nella came forward.
"I would like to know the details. You suddenly have much more impressive control of your power than when you left."
"There are no details that he can share," came a firm and commanding voice from the back. Mike was suddenly back in the conversation just long enough to end it. As always, everyone respected his wishes, which only served to confirm my suspicions about him. Tiffany appeared with the blood washed off, but the swelling and cuts on her face were clearly visible now.
"What did I miss? What's going on?" she asked me quietly.
"You didn't miss anything. Basically, I told everyone that I can't share too much. I have an idea where they took Daniel, and as soon as Jack tracks down the lead, I'm gone."
"You mean we're gone, right?"
I wasn't sure how she could help me, but I agreed. Everyone deserves the right to choose their own destiny, poor decisions and all. "First, we need to fix a few things," I said, and knelt down in front of her. I laid both hands on her face and gently felt the ridge of her nose. Definitely broken. "You want me to fix that for you?"
"I'm not sure. My head is throbbing already, so I doubt you will make it much worse."
I smiled at her vote of confidence and said, "This may hurt a bit at first. I need to align the bones before I can heal them." She nodded and swallowed hard. I put my hands on her face with a thumb on either side of her nose and pulled with the power till the bone moved in line, then healed the fracture. Her eyes got extremely wide at one point, but she never made a sound or shed a tear. Tough chick. I patched up the other scratches on her face as well, but the swelling would have to subside naturally. Superfine tissue trauma that caused bruising and inflammation was a bit too tedious to fix. At least that's what I told myself. "How's that?" I asked, already knowing it was a great deal better.
"Not bad,"
she remarked, feeling her face with her hands, trying to find the open wounds and crooked nose.
"Can you fix my ribs too?"
She lifted the side of her shirt and revealed a nasty bruise just below her bra strap. I swallowed hard as my more primitive subconscious started barking out orders. Or maybe it was just barking. Down her side was a detailed dragon tattoo with a long sweeping tail that disappeared below her belt. Oomph. I really need to see where that tail goes. Back to the bruise, my conscious brain took the reins and forced me to the task at hand. I gently felt along each rib and she winced a few times. "This may hurt, but try to take a deep breath and hold it. I need you to stretch your ribs so I can heal them in place." She nodded and sucked in a breath, grimacing all the while. A few seconds is all it took to mend the bones back together. The bruising also subsided greatly, but not completely. "That's the best I can do, I think. Zoo might be able to get the bruising down a bit more." She shook her head.
"This is great. You can fix me any time you want."
She winked. More barking. All the attention in the room was on Nico being back, leaving Tiffany and myself alone. I was about to start working my magic again when Jack shouted from the kitchen area. "I got it, Finn. Come on, take a look." Jack frantically waved me over. Naturally, everyone moved in that direction. "Let's see it, Jack. I knew I could count on you." Jack beamed, clearly thriving on making these financial connections. "It's a pretty weak connection, but it is pretty typical for the fallen. The yacht is licensed to an individual out of a small town in upstate New York. The town is right on the Hudson River, making it perfect for inconspicuous transport to and from the coast. The credit cards used by this individual for repairs are also used at a marina near Atlantic City. That alone is not overly significant, but when I look at the patterns of what other transactions take place in that general vicinity each time this guy buys gas or gets the boats cleaned, I can see better who he's transporting. There are 3 individuals that commonly ride the yacht. Each one makes purchases in the general area at the same time the boat is docked at that location. Each individual works for a company called a Vetsi." "And what the heck is a Vetsi? I've never heard of it. Sounds Italian." Jack continued. "No, I hadn't either, which is actually pretty common for fallen front companies. A Vetsi is actually short for American Veterinary Science. They do work developing pharmaceuticals and surgical procedures for animals, mostly large animal veterinary procedures for farm animals, according to their website. They have a large facility in upstate New York with hundreds of acres. It is perfect for staying off the radar." "And how far is it from the hospital that Daniel was taken to when he escaped last time?" The one that burned down. Nella looked at the map.
40 miles. Plenty close enough for a trucker to have picked him up and driven him to a hospital.
I looked around at the anxious faces surrounding me. This is not my cell, not my team to lead. I said, I will not ask anyone here to join me. Daniel will be free, but it will take more than hiding and running. We need to go on the offensive. Nella spoke up before I could finish.
We cannot follow you, Finn. This is how cells are destroyed, with careless, impulsive, and reckless decisions. But at the same time, we will help you from the shadows however we can.
She looked at me squarely and added,
You need to be successful, Finn. You must.
Nodding, I squeezed her shoulder, and then she turned unexpectedly and hugged me. The room was silent at the unusual display of sentiment from Nella. She let go after a second and wiped her eye while moving across the room. I guess this is it then, I said, looking at the desperate faces. They wanted to help, I could tell. You all will need to disperse quickly. The police are probably on their way. This location will be hot for a while with all those bodies outside.
No worries. We got it cleaned up, Marcus said, pointing to Lexi. The bodies are stacked in the garage. Most of the blood and all the shell casings are gone. Any regular cop comes by in response to the shooting, they won't find anything. They are typically pretty slow to respond to gunfights in this part of town anyway. Better to let the gang thugs kill each other and move on than get caught in the middle of it. We'll dispose of the bodies tonight. Still, the fallen might return, so we need to vacate.
I guess this is it. My voice cracked a little. I had the feeling that this was goodbye one way or another.
Don't worry. I'll give you a hand, Nico said, walking to the door. We should get going if we are going to do this while it is dark. We have a few hours' drive ahead of us.
Tiffany stood and walked to the door to stand by Nico. To my surprise, Tony walked to stand with him.
I owe you. Sorry, Nella. I guess this means I'm out.
No one replied. Thanks, guys. 4 is a good number. Better than going alone like I had been planning. Nella shouted from across the room.
5 is a better number, I think.
At that, a black mountain of fur leapt over the couch. Tiffany and Nico both took 2 steps back in shock. Shadrach looked up at me with a deep sadness in his eyes. Can dogs even be sad? Well, this dog sure could. 5 it is then. We walked into the darkness of the garage for the last time. Death or worse lay ahead of me. Either way, my future was elsewhere.